You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to thewritingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show this week. We have fantastic guests lined up for you, and you might notice I am Chrisless. Although I am Chris, there's also no other Chris. Mr. Hooley is having terrible internet issues, and he may join us via his phone at some stage, but it's unlikely. So best wishes to him on this Friday night, where he might be tuning in or watching if he can. But hello to you guys. I hope you're doing really well. And thank you for tuning in. If you're watching this back or listening back on the podcast, or you get to tune in live through our Substack, thank you so much for doing that. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy tonight's guest and our chat. So, a bit of breaking news for you first this week. I found online a very interesting video that someone mentioned, and I've researched this a little bit. And it is, in fact, the case that on the 26th of February, which is only 5 days away, all your ebooks that are through Amazon Kindle, the ones that you've downloaded, all the future ones you will download will be going straight to the Amazon cloud rather than download to your phone. And there is now a process where you will have to tactically download that ebook to your phone or your Kindle rather than the automatic downloads that used to happen. So if that's the case for you guys, you may want to go ahead and download those files before the 26th, because it might make it a little easier for you. So that's the case for your readers as well. If you're an author, a lot of people will want your books downloaded if they've pre-ordered them or if they ordered them, but they may have to then do it manually from that date. So it may be worth you talking to your readers on social media or however you contact them to let them know that is a change that is happening. It shouldn't massively affect the way things are done, but it's more of a physical, manual way to do it rather than the automatic system that used to happen. And assuming that most people have the internet, it should still be fine just to read it on the cloud. But, you know, it's a change, and one that I don't think is massively beneficial to us, because, you know, as a Kindle reader, you like your downloads to automatically appear in your Kindle. But not sure how that's going to work with a Kindle device, because that's kind of how it works. So whether you can log into the cloud on your Kindle device, the ones people have already bought years ago, I'm not entirely sure. I will try and find out more about that. So we'll see. Keep tuned for that. Other news, I have started this week my ice bath journey challenge, I guess is the word, thanks to Chris Hooley. We have indeed talked about a lot of mental health things lately, talked about starting kind of a newer podcast to do with mental health and writers and all those things. And the ice challenge, or the ice bucket bath thing, whatever that might be, ice pod, is something that Chris Hooley has been doing, and I've now been convinced to do the same. So I have started that this week, and it's been really helpful. It's been horrible to get into the ice pool and get really cold and shivering and horrible, but it's only 3 minutes long at the moment. But once I get out of that ice bath and once I've warmed up, I get a massive amount of energy, and it's made me really productive and energetic. So it could be a real benefit for authors. I'm just saying this. I'm someone who hates the cold, but it may be something for you guys. If you're struggling for a bit of motivation, then perhaps doing this challenge and getting in the icy water, even if it's a cold shower, it may give you that energy later on to go on a really good writing sprint, and get that creativity flowing. So give it a go if you are not used to it, even if you're dreading it, because I am pretty much every day that I do this. But once I'm out, I get that really good endorphin release and the energy levels go really high up. And that lasts a day or two. It really does. So try that out if it's something that you are looking forward to, or if it's something that you're feeling like you're struggling with energy and creativeness. It may be a key to get you motivated. So give that a go. What am I going to do is I'm going to get my guest on, and we're going to get into a good conversation about all things writing and creativeness. So please give him a nice warm welcome once I introduce him. So tonight we have a fantastic guest joining us, someone who has dedicated his life to the power of storytelling, both in the written word and through guiding others on their own writing journeys. He's an author, an editor, and part-time writing professor from Ottawa in Canada, with a background that's as fascinating as his fiction. With degrees in history, theology, and public policy, plus a diploma in professional writing, he brings a wealth of knowledge and depth to his work. As an indie author, he's embraced the freedom and challenges of self-publishing, crafting stories that explore good and evil, faith, and the complexities of human experience. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to the one and only Tim McKay. Hello, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, you are very, very welcome. It's great to chat to you and to bring you on the show and get to know you a bit more. So, thank you so much. How are you doing, Tim?
I am pretty good, and I'm laughing from everything about those ice baths. Living here in Canada, I love the cold. So that sounds that I haven't tried it, but it actually kind of sounds like heaven to me, because I always treat winter like free energy. Just a quick walk outside is a really good way to just get your juices flowing again.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I've preached about a lot. When people get stuck in that creative rut, going out for a walk is fantastic to get those juices flowing. But to do it in the cold, I guess, is another level. But honestly, I am someone that does not love the cold like you do. I hate it. But I have this weird kind of addiction. It's only been 4 sessions this week, but I already have this weird addiction where I just want to get back in there, and I can't understand why. The first 30 seconds are horrific. Your breathing is terrible.
Yeah.
But once I settle in there and I'm feeling this uncomfort, there's something really empowering about it. And once I get out and warm up, I get this energy burst that I can't explain. And
I think I get it, because if I'm in circumstances that force me to be out continually in winter, that's a whole other story. But as long as it's in either short bursts or bursts that I decide, if I'm going out to play hockey or to go snowboarding, that's intentional. That I set the limits and it's under my control. It's fine. When you're forced to walk 2 hours from a subway or a metro station to a vehicle that has been towed during a snowstorm that you didn't know about, and you get frostbite because you have to walk all the way home, that's another story. And that did happen to me once. So, there are exceptions, but when it's short bursts that I control, I love it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I live in a pretty warm country, I guess, because I live by the coast as well. So we get quite cold winds, but we don't get the snow pretty much ever.
Although wind can often be a lot worse than just snow. So that actually does sound pretty bad.
But I would love to know then if you take on that journey, because you must have the opportunities, even the local lakes or waters that will be cold enough where you live to get your reaction going the right way.
Yeah, I wonder. Because in Ottawa, we've got a nice big river right here. So, I'd be interested if they actually, I wonder, I bet there are ice bath or quick dive, groups. So I might just look into it now.
Trust me, you don't even need the ice. Just cold water is enough to get that reaction from you. And apart from the health benefits and the positivity, I'm going to take this to the next level when I get the chance. Whereas I'm going to, perhaps even tomorrow, I'm going to jump in the ice pool. I'm going to come out and then warm up, and then I'm going to sit down and write and see how much more productive it makes me feel. And it may be something that we can tap into as writers.
I did once nosedive into a lake, and it was about the end of October at the time, so it was very cold. So I have definitely felt the rush of just diving into like very close to ice cold water. But it's been
3 minutes is not a lot to get such a benefit from it. So it's certainly worth thinking about. Yeah. But you mentioned where you're from, and apart from the cold and the kind of dangers that you have where you have to walk home. What's the writing life like where you live? Are you mostly online, or do you get to meet up with people?
Mostly online, although that's changed just over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that I've really been into it. As far as self-publishing and fiction goes.
Yeah.
When I first put myself out there completely online and digital, but then you meet people very quickly, especially on social media. There's such a, basically wherever you go, there are huge writing communities, and inevitably you run into to other writers near you. So actually, even tomorrow, I'm grabbing coffee with one of my favorite booktubers.
Wow.
Kay's Hidden Shelf, where we just met online, and now every once in a while we catch up. I'm bringing her a signed copy of my latest book. Little fun things like that. I know at least 3 or 4 other authors that I met through Twitter that are here in Ottawa too. And now that I teach at the local college, so Algonquin College here in Ottawa. So now I know a lot more authors as well, and up and coming, self-published authors. Yeah, so it just depends. Again, it's newer for me to be actually meeting writers around here. I've been invited to 1 or 2 critique groups. I haven't made it out yet. I really want to, but I'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine with your editing mind, you'd love to go in there and just and teaching mindset, of course, that you'd love to go in there and dissect a few things and give tips, because I think as creative people, we're not, it's very rare that we've ever met anybody in the creative or the writing community world that doesn't want to help other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's in our own sort of genes when it comes to creativeness. And I think for yourself, someone with your talents would fit right into that world.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I'm also, now I say this jokingly, but it is partially true. The best part about all this is, I mean, I'm helpful selfishly, and yet it just makes me want to help more, because the more I help someone else, I'm learning as I go. As I'm editing someone else's work, I'm getting ideas. I'm seeing them do something really, really well, and it helps me think of how I could incorporate it. Or I see them do something very, very wrong, and I think, okay, I need to make sure I'm not. Sometimes I'll edit someone else and I'll think, oh, have I done that? And I'll jump back into my drafts and catch myself doing it. So it's great. The push and pull in the community, the more you give, the more you get, is kind of really what happens there.
I understand that completely. And a lot of people have said on the show and talked about this, where they've been really successful. And the key of what they've mentioned is the fact that they've gone back to a book they've read and they loved. And they dissected that book and figured out what makes it work and why they love it, and then applied that to their own work. Yeah. So I'm really interested then with the kind of editing journey, because it represents the same kind of way. But how did you get onto an editing journey, and how has that changed your work? Apart, you mentioned obviously picking things up, but has it really changed the way you started writing?
Well, funny enough, editing predated fiction writing in my case. So, and it's only been maybe the last year and a half that I've started editing, for authors, for fiction. So before that, it was my longer academic journey. So going from a Bachelor of Theology to a Bachelor of Arts in History. And it was around that time that I started doing editing for, student journals. And then I got hired to work for a social history journal. So that was university level. And a lot of my work was admin. And then I helped with some editing on the side and kind of built up from there. And then when I did my master's, I started helping out with the student journal there. And the next year I became the editor-in-chief. And so it was around that time, here I was still, the thing about academic writing is you can get into ruts very easily, and they don't teach you writing in a lot of university programs. They really don't. So a lot of us, you're writing the same drivel as everyone else, and it's very low quality. And I knew that something in me, I mean, I've always loved reading fiction. I've always, read very widely, and I knew I could do better, but I saw writing skill as kind of this ethereal, abstract thing that you either had or didn't, right? But when I got the opportunity to be editor-in-chief for this journal, I was I hadn't been asked. I think it was just an idea I had. I wanted to run a workshop to help the other editors on the team kind of, I wanted us to up our game because we were editing for other master's and PhD level students. And, I wanted us to be on the same page. I wanted to kind of see where everyone was at. So I started taking some online courses in editing and in just writing in general. And as I branched out, I realized very quickly, oh, wait, there are actually learnable components here that are skills, not just innate talent, which shouldn't have been as mind-blowing as it was. But for me at that point in my life, it was, and I dove in head first, had a lot of fun teaching others as I was learning. So that was a lot of fun. Next thing you know, I just got addicted to the game itself. So instead of going the route I was going to go, which was into government work, because I was in a policy master's, so kind of a split between economics and poli-sci. But I very quickly realized, no, I love this. So I transitioned from that to a writing program. After my master's, I went to Algonquin, where I now teach in the same program. And so I took their 2-year program. They let me do it in one because of all my previous too much school. Anyways, never. I'm done with school other than teaching at this point. And so I kind of the editing is what actually birthed my love of writing. So it was kind of the other way around in my case. And over the next year or so, I experimented with writing, started telling a story that I had it in my head for years, but I never really thought I would give it a chance. But I just started consistently putting in the words every day. Next thing you know, here we are.
Incredible. What's really interesting there is being on one path with career mindset or like an aspiration to do one thing, and then to switch it up when you find something that you're really passionate about, even more so than what you thought you were passionate about in the first place. I kind of relate to that because I only kind of discovered creativity in the past, say, 10 years for myself. So was there a lot of pressure for you to stay on that path, or were you in a position where you could quite freely go to that creative side where you really found your passion there?
Oh, there was definitely the pressure, for sure. I think I just realized very quickly how miserable I was there.
Yeah.
If you had asked a younger version of me, I would have told you, I would have known that I think I hit a point where I wanted something stable. And so I just let myself slide into something stable that was kind of soul draining, maybe, not necessarily my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I would have probably stayed there if I hadn't discovered something that I was both passionate about and I think like moderately good at, that at least there was the hope that it could lead to something bigger and better.
Yeah.
That to me, if it's a 1 in 100 chance compared to how miserable I was becoming very quickly, I thought, no, I'm going for it. Worst case scenario, I have a lot to fall back on to some extent. It's always a risk. It's always a huge risk making a big change like that.
It is. I think what you're talking about there relates to a lot of people, and it's kind of the way that the modern world is built, where you're kind of shoehorned most of the time into a career that you're not sure that you love at such a young age.
Yeah.
And then you get that stability of income and responsibility, and then all of a sudden those sort of aspirations or dreams you had kind of fade away. So I think a pivotal moment there, you found that creative passion and you went with it, and it's paid off.
Yeah, I was at a lucky time in my life where that another 3 years later or a few years earlier, I might not have been able to make that decision. So
yeah,
and that's the thing. I get it. We're not always so lucky to have the chance to make those big transitions, and they do come at a cost. They do. So I think I can even say in my case, it was always a big gamble, and it's really only started paying off maybe the last year or so. Up until then, it was always just one foot in front of the other and see what happens,
Definitely. I think there's a lot of people that start writing when they get older, into their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. We've had people talking about the writing in their 70s, so that journey started. Do you think that is a reflection of what we just talked about in that sense?
For sure. Tough. It's tough to say. I've thought about this. I've thought about, the difference between those who start very early, those who start very late. Those who start early often talk about craving experiences, and they have to go out of their way to find new experiences to have something to write about.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people who write later have lots of experiences that have been welling up, and eventually it just explodes out of them. I definitely probably lean more that way myself. I don't think I would have been able to write the story I've now written 10 years ago even, or it would have been very different. I would have been able to work on the skills, but the story itself would have looked very different from how it is.
So before the show started, we kind of talked about editing very briefly, and I mentioned going down that self-editing process, which has had its errors and its learning journeys all by itself. So people who are in my position, who are stubborn not to go down the route of hiring someone who knows better, what tips have you got for the editing world then that someone could take on themselves if need be?
Yeah, see, it's tough. I'm not one of those editors who says you need to. I'm all for authors, especially self-published authors, learning to do as much of this themselves as they can. In part because if you don't know, even if you do hire an editor, the biggest mistake I see so many make is they hire an editor, but they don't know better. So they can't tell the difference between a suggestion and a correction. Yeah. And so they treat everything like a suggestion, ignore half of it. And so huge errors still make it into the final version. And the editor now has their name attached to a manuscript that is miles away from anything they want to be associated with. It's part of the game, but it's one of the things for a self-published author. It's worth investing the time in the skills. I think there are some great online courses out there. Some of it, the easy answer you can always give is read more to get a taste for what actually works. A lot of grammar is intuition that you really do have to absorb. Beyond that, it does get tricky. Like that's the thing, is some of this comes with time and experience and study. You just have to, pay attention to when someone points out a mistake, figure out why it's a mistake and practice, but not just practicing more writing, because sometimes that solidifies mistakes that you make over and over, right? You have to actually, practice getting feedback and incorporating it, Another one for me, I think this is something when you talked about, I thought of this when you talked about taking something you love and studying it. This to me applies to editing as well as to learning the craft for writing. But I am a huge advocate for copy work, where you take a text that you love and you actually either by hand or by typing, write it out yourself. And as you're doing that, you study. But that works for editing too, in a really fun way. So I've done this with my own work. My 171,000 word book, I did this. I put the original manuscript on one page or on one screen, and on the other screen, I had a blank document, and I just typed. And I retyped the entire thing, all 171,000 words. And while I was doing that, I caught so many errors that I had missed reading it multiple times. Over and over and over again, I would spot an error. So what I would do is I would correct it in the new doc, and then I wouldn't copy and paste from that document because it's too easy while typing again to make new errors, But I would make the correction in the manuscript itself. And just as I was doing that process, though, I was also spotting other things that I could tweak or do better. I was spotting style inconsistencies, because as you retype it, you kind of get into the flow of the writing itself, and then you catch spots that feel jarring because they're out of place, or the maybe I was tired the day I was writing that chapter, so it's not as polished as the chapter before or the chapter after, things like that, right? And you kind of immerse yourself on a whole other level in your own writing. It will come out more polished than the original version. So even doing that for a page can be worth it. It's a good exercise.
It sounds really interesting. I've never considered taking an extract from someone's work and retyping that to kind of see how it flows. That makes so much sense now you've mentioned it, but never considered it before.
I had heard of some other authors who had done that ages ago, but funny enough, I got introduced to it in the marketing world. Not in the literary world. So a lot of copywriters and marketers will do this with just a simple ads or an email newsletter or anything that has worked.
Yeah.
Right? Like anything that's sold that they've verified has sold lots or performed well, and they'll copy that out, because sometimes that's just how our mind works on a subconscious level. You know, we absorb what works subconsciously, even if we can't quite put it into words. And it's a little trick they use to get better at their own marketing sales copy.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, you know, replicate what's worked. And I think that's a good exercise. I think I will definitely try that and put it out to our followers on social media to give that kind of recreation a go. And interestingly, you mentioned audiobooks before we started. My first book was an audiobook. And one of the big things that I think exposes errors is listening back to your work as an audio. Yeah. So I think even if you record it yourself, you read it out and record it yourself and listen back to that, that's a really good way of picking up kind of sentence structure, or, you know, like you mentioned, plots and things that will jump out at you that you didn't quite notice when you're writing it. I think that's a really strong tip there. That shocked me.
There is a funny caveat to that, and it relates to a post I made on Twitter today. So it's happened a few times, but one friend in particular, I remember editing a piece of writing for him, and he didn't like any of my comments, and he said, "That's the way I speak." And I said, "No, it's not. I've known you for years. You don't speak like this. This is incomprehensible." And he just refused to hear any of the corrections, and they were dramatic grammatical, you know, errors. And so it is funny. Some of us, I get it. There have been times where I've written something I would never say out loud, and I look back at it and I think, and I have to really force myself. It's kind of giving up your darlings. You know, you have to kill your darlings. You have to be willing to let go. And sometimes we're so in love with our writing that we start to treat it as if we would talk that way. So there are some people for whom that method does not work, in my experience. It's really funny, but it is a very good one. I did that as well. I recorded, I did it for two-thirds of my book. I recorded myself reading the chapters and then listened back to it.
Isn't it amazing that that person you're talking about had a real impression of what they sounded like, but you as an outsider completely saw that differently?
I feel like that goes with as well. We often imagine how we sound as very different from our own. If you listen to a recording of yourself, it can be very jarring until you get used to it. Like looking at playbacks of interviews like this can be very humbling.
Yeah, definitely. And you said in the comments, some of my students think that my commands are suggestions. I try to differentiate between do this or else, and I recommend doing X, Y, and Z. You kind of mentioned how, you know, the editor could have a published work that they've worked on and didn't represent their kind of skill. Is that something that you're experienced with, where your suggestions are not really taken on, and how do you feel as an editor when that happens?
I mean, my thought process there is it is ultimately the editor or the author's piece of work. You know, it is their freedom, and sometimes there are times where something jars me completely, but readers don't care, and that's so. At the end of the day, I don't mind stepping back from that at all. It just means I might not maybe put their work in my public portfolio, but I'm happy to still have my name on it. I'm happy to still support them as an author. You know. So it doesn't bother me that much, really. And to be honest, I think in full-length books, it's never been that huge an issue, really. It's usually shorter works, shorter stories, where sometimes this happens more often. You know, so maybe a newer author, sometimes it happens more. And then there have been other times where in the process itself, you give corrections back to an author and they push back hard. And I think that just comes from the visceral reaction of right away when you get feedbacks, you know, some part of us wants to fight back. And then that same author surprises me when they do the final edits and send me the final version, and they've incorporated 99% of what I said even better than I hoped. That happened actually pretty recently, and I had just nothing but praise for this author. And this was someone who had pushed back pretty strongly on a few comments. And I think they showed my comments to someone else, and that person said, "Oh no, he's totally right." And so, you know, it always helps to get more than one voice as well.
It does, and it's important to trust the people that are professionals and have the kind of reputation to improve things, even if it doesn't make sense to you at the time. In that example is a good one, and the best sort of published authors, traditionally published authors that we've had on the show, always talk about the great relationship they have with their editors and marketers.
Yeah,
and it's a collaborative process that kind of makes that successful. And I think even as an indie author, having services like you provide there, and you kind of get on board with what you're paying for and getting supported with, is kind of the right step. So having that kind of success from initial reaction was really good.
Well, there's a tough balance there too. And this is something I wrestle with. You don't want to leave mountains of long comments. I try to keep my comments short, but usually it'll be something along the lines of, I would do, I here's something that maybe a little off here, or here's okay, so this happened here, I would maybe do this, and then I'll usually try to give an example. And then if I think it's necessary, I'll add a little text. But my thought process there is I don't want anyone to have just blind faith in my editing abilities, because I don't want them to just, I don't want them to write the story I would write. I want it to still be theirs. So I try to give them something to work with. But my ultimate goal as an editor, more often than not, is to teach while I'm editing. If I can show them why it's an issue, then one, that saves me time. If I can show them very strongly why it's an issue early on, then the next 5 times they do it, I can just say, oh, it's this again, and leave it at that. So it saves me time. It also helps them going forward to not make that mistake anymore.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Before we move on to talk about your latest book, I read up that you were previously a pastor, and you write fiction and fantasy now. How do they relate? Was there much of a crossover in those worlds? And have you ever you talked kind of before about your life experience and putting that into your work. So how much is that in translated into your writing?
It definitely influences it for sure. Yeah, I mean, and I liked it. I mean, that was the period leading up to ministry, and the ministry itself, it adds up to a full 13 years of my life. It's not a short stretch. And I mean, Bible college itself was 4 years, very foundational years for me, straight out of high school. And then roughly a year and a half, helping with one church, and then, filling in as an interim pastor, and then staying on a kind of an associate. And then from there, I went to Montreal and was a youth and young adults. I helped with some of the kids ministry as well, but mostly it was youth and young adults that I ran. And so I was pastor there for a little over a year and a month, something like that. And I mean, yeah, so that definitely does not just go away,
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about rereading books I love and just the influence they've had on you. Well, I mean, I had entire not chapters. I had entire books of the Bible memorized. I've read the entire thing. I think I did a tally at one point. I had read the New Testament something like 40 times, the Old Testament at least 15. So, I mean, I knew that thing, front to back. And so there's so much influence there. Some of it is the storytelling influence. Everything from parables to Old Testament stories and how they influence the way you think, and the drama and the intrigue thrown into some of my writing. For sure, it's there.
Yeah.
I would say less theology. It's been an interesting journey in the years since. So in the way, it's funny, I used to put on my profile, I used to actually say on my social media profiles that I used to be a pastor. I still care about good and evil. And there's that's a whole other side conversation. I always used to get some people who would say, "Oh, you used to be a pastor. You must be a militant atheist, immoral, child." I mean, I could go on. Like, people would make all these terrible assumptions about just having no morality, no compass, no character on one extreme, and on the other extreme, they would expect this raving, zealous nut job, So that's part of why I ended up eventually taking that down. I didn't think either of those extremes were a fair representation of who I am. So, but I liked that line. And I think it does encompass it. I definitely give a lot of focus to themes of good and evil, which I mean is pretty prevalent in fantasy in general. But I'd like to think I have some unique takes there, influenced by some theology and philosophy, and just seeing. I think for me, seeing the way influence spreads and seeing the way and looking at our susceptibility, both to our own internal failings and to the influences in our lives, and how we balance that and how we stand up for what's right and how we fight back, against what's wrong in the world, and having faith that even against impossible odds, there is light, and it's worth fighting for. It's worth building. It's worth protecting, So it definitely influences.
Absolutely. That kind of reminds me of one of my favorite tattoos by there. It's a Mumford & Sons lyric that says, "So give me hope in the darkness that I will see the light."
Yes,
I love that.
I love Mumford & Sons.
Yes, me too. I was at a pub in Cardiff before a gig and I actually met him before the gig.
That's awesome.
That was amazing. He was literally, we were in a pub and there's a window and he was on the phone outside the window, and I said, "Look," to my wife, I said, "Look at that guy looking like Marcus Mumford." And it was him. I was like, "Oh my God."
That's incredible.
So wow. That was good. It's amazing. And one thing that I really have talked about a lot, because of my personal experience, not going down the academic kind of writing route, is life experience that I kind of feel like I have a lot of, that plays very strongly into my writing. And you talk a lot about working with people through different kind of situations in kind of religious ways, in academic ways and beyond. Does that play a big part in your writing as well?
So kind of that either pastoral support or academic support kind of thing?
Yeah, just kind of like having that experience of working with people so often, that ability to kind of translate that onto the page through natural conversations and people's sort of personalities showing on the page. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yes and no. It's funny. Despite a lot of, the work that I've done, including work right now, as a teacher, being very, socially forward.
Yeah.
The irony is now if we're gonna, it's just to oversimplify it, I wouldn't consider myself either a strong extrovert or introvert. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I need time to recharge on my own, but then I thrive in crowds as well. I'm always torn between the two. It's the story of my life. So there are some elements that I maybe struggle with more than you'd expect. Like I say I struggle, and yet I get compliments from people from time to time. And then I also see areas where I know I can improve. So something like believable dialogue. I have a lot of fun with my dialogue, a lot of playfulness, a lot of intensity, a lot of, thick emotion, a lot drawing from real experiences. If anything, I think I like to say that the least believable dialogue in my books is from real experiences, which makes it more fun. I've even had comments from people saying no one would ever say this. I'm like, yes, they would.
Yeah, I've experienced that. Thanks.
Yep, those are my favorite things to throw in.
Do you think then in fantasy that you need to alter the way that people talk, or do you find that you still write in fantasy the same sort of style that people talk now?
I think every author, should develop their own voice. That's, as they go. I've seen some people who demand that epic fantasy have a certain tone and voice, and I just could not care less. Now, I say that, and yet I do. I think I've migrated more towards a classic fantasy voice as my first book progressed along. It gets more to that. Now I'm writing the sequel, and there are some parts that really do feel like that denser fantasy with more that classical flowing voice, as opposed to a choppier, punchier, more modern tone that I think I had early on. But I like that. I wanted to have a faster pace, a modern feel. So it depends on the characters. It depends on the context. I don't. I'm definitely, and I even something like contractions. Some will say, "Don't you dare throw a contraction into the narrative text of epic fantasy." And I say, "Forget that. I will use them where I want, when I want."
Yeah. Well, I think that's what makes, if everyone conformed to the same structure in all genres, then everything would be so similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we need to keep our identities as authors.
Yeah.
I really do. So let's talk about, and I'm going to probably pronounce this slightly wrong, the Fall of Selvandrea.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Could you let us know about that? And if you can, pitch us the blurb and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I like to keep the summary of the book itself short. I just tell people it's epic, dark flintlock fantasy. So set, in a kind of Napoleonic era, level of technology, muskets, but some medieval brought into. It's kind of a continent in the middle of transition, technologically speaking. And it has some sci-fi in it. There's a very strong sci-fi backdrop to the world. And I like to give people a heads up about that, because some people love it and some people will say, don't you dare do these genre blends. And I love that. So I'm giving everyone a warning. If you don't want any sci-fi thrown in, it's a huge part of the book for sure. Anyways, I won't spoil anything there except to say, beyond that, so beyond the sci-fi element, it's dark, epic flintlock fantasy, and I like to call it a villain origin.
Yes. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I like that.
And that's kind of all you need to know going in.
Yeah, I love mixing genres up myself. I really do, and I know people are against that, but like I said, I think things need to be unique. What reaction have you had based on that?
Well, again, very mixed. So I've had some people message me and say, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Now there are very strong, not even hints, it's in your face very early on in the book, but then the story follows a few characters more just in the Napoleonic era, and it carries forward for a bit and then it comes back. And when it comes back, it's very, I wanted it to come not as a shock, but it is very necessary to explain some of what's going on in the story. Yeah. So it does suddenly make sense of a lot of what you've been experiencing. So there's kind of a very critical point in the book where you're either going to love it or hate it. And a lot of people are telling me they love it. And then every once in a while I get someone who says, oh, how dare you? And I just kind of say, fair enough, not for you. I get it. I totally get it. You got to respect different people's preferences, which is why I give the warning. But for those who go in knowing what's coming, I mean, I like to joke too. I mean, so the spaceship coming out of the sky didn't give it away, but that's not even a spoiler. It's just there's one scene very early on that should have given it away. And it still shocks people when we get into the fun stuff.
I think most of the best books are controversial in that sense.
Yeah.
And putting into my mind a spaceship in that era with medieval thrown into the mix, it sounds like a perfect mix. How did you how accurate do you feel you were to those different eras?
Oh, that's tough. Now, I like to have some fun there. I do my research. I studied history for 4 years too, so that helps. And one of my favorite genres is historical fiction in general. I love the Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey Maturin books. If you've ever encountered those, the Master and Commander books. If you've seen the movie with Russell Crowe, it's the original books that inspired that, or Count of Monte Cristo, or Les Miserables. Absolutely love those classics. So things like that definitely influenced, and I threw in a lot of research along the way. That said, because it's a fantasy world, and I knew the history I had in mind for this world, where some things I don't want to spoil, but because there's some futuristic elements that have influenced this world without you necessarily realizing, it means that there's some, let's say, nations that have advanced beyond others. So you have things like muskets and cannons, and even a little bit more advanced, like what's the word I'm looking for? Not shells. This is going to bug me now. Mortars. You have slightly more advanced mortars. And then at the same time, you have other nations that are still using trebuchets, and you have some medieval shields and swords thrown into the mix. So I don't mind blending some of those sorts of lines, and I do it in, I think, a way that's believable. I told one beta reader who had loved what I'd done so far, I said, oh, just wait till you see the trebuchets. And they said, you threw trebuchets into a battle with cannons? And I said, just wait. And they saw what I did, and okay, never mind, that was awesome, So I think it's about execution at some point. If you execute it well and it's believable within the context of your world, I think that matters more than, accuracy to the world we live in. It has to be believable in yours.
I think escapism is what creativity is all about, right?
Absolutely.
And there's, even going into the gaming world, there's a new game out on the PC. I've not played it. My friends talked to me about it. And that's about a time traveler that goes back into a similar world with cannons and sword fighting people. But they've got modern, I'm pretty sure he's on a motorbike and he's got modern weapons. And people are really craving that game and talking about it quite a lot. So clearly there's always a market for something different. And I think you're tapping into that very well in that sense.
Yeah,
and
hopefully.
My historical knowledge is pretty poor, but I'd love to know, like, a cannon versus a trebuchet. I can't even say it properly. Trebuchet. Is that how you say it?
Trebuchet.
Yes. That would be interesting because, I wonder, stick a couple either end and see what comes up as the winner.
I think at that point, it would depend a lot on angles. If you have angles, I think, anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds good. Anya says, I love the weapons mashup. Yeah.
I had a lot of fun with that. I didn't want, the tough thing is, and this is tough, especially in epic fantasy in particular, is you don't want to get too wrapped up in some of the details because it can get easy to just drone on for pages and pages about all these fun things in your mind. And people want the story, they want the dialogue, they want the internal thought process, they want the exposition. Finding that balance is the toughest part for me.
So in terms of historical events then, were there any that kind of inspired the things that you wrote about in this story?
So Tim's as in, so from my life experience or from history?
From history, with you being a historical teacher, history teacher, were there any kind of real stories that you loved and they kind of influenced your writing as well?
Any particulars that influenced? I want to say one, there were probably one or two dramatic episodes from the Old Testament. They're going back to my theology days that had an influence. There's one very dramatic battle in the Old Testament where basically there's just this. It starts with a smaller duel between about, I think it was 6 and 6 on each side. They fight each other, all of them die, which then leads to everyone around both armies clashing, even though they had agreed not to, depending on the outcome of the duels. But all the duels went so dramatically wrong. So things like that, some of that War of the Roses, bittersweet. I definitely would not call my book grimdark, but it does sometimes have those darker elements of things going wrong. And the story taking a darker turn, again, with that hint of hope that I'm going for. Out of more recent history, though, again, some of it comes out of influences from more historical fiction. I'm trying to think of a very specific one. I know, like, there are some. I'd have a hard time. I'd have to get back to you.
Don't stress about that. That's fine. So obviously you mentioned that you're writing the sequel. When can people expect that? And do you think people are going to receive it in the same kind of way they've received the first book?
Yeah, I mean, so far, I think anyone who liked the first book is going to be very happy with the second. Even samples that I've passed by, the most frequent comment from people who loved the first one has been like, "You've upped your game." Nice. Which I love hearing, because if anything, the reason the sequel has come along so slowly is because I write in sprints. Usually, so daily, aiming for, let's say, 1,000 to 2,000 words a day for maybe 2-3 months at a time. And then I will essentially pause, usually to do some other book related task or to focus more on editing. But I'll use those in between times to really focus on learning more of the craft, so that when I get back to writing, I'm constantly trying to make sure what comes out next is better than where I was at the day before, So that said, it's probably going to be about the same length. So I'm about 75,000 words in. It's going to take at least another 4 to 5 months, I think, to finish drafting. And then, I need time for editing. My editing process, a little lengthier. I really want to release the next book, I would say, by December. The goal is December 2025. Yeah.
Well, because when I checked the book out on Amazon, it's got Chronicles 1. I'm pretty sure that's what's written there somewhere.
Yeah. The Draemeir Chronicle #1. Yeah.
So have you a plan for how many books are going to be in this series?
Minimum 3.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a very real possibility it would never be fully closed off. I have a pretty fun ending in mind if I do that, where it would end on the third. That was the original plan, was something like that, but I always wanted it to have room for more. It's a story that doesn't end with the ending I have in mind. It's not a cliffhanger, but it ends the arc that we're on, but there's room for more. So if I could, my dream would be to write a much longer series, but I want to start with a trilogy, see how people like it.
I think with a series in fantasy like you've got, people are often or characters are often able to go off on their own sort of side stories as well. There's always characters that intervene at some stage that can have their own stories. So I think, you know, its potential is endless in that scenario.
Well, I've started writing now this I started, but I've put it aside. I want to finish the sequel, but I started a separate shorter book that takes a character I just barely introduced in this book, but it's a young 7-year-old boy, and this is more or less an alternate. Give me 2 seconds here. I have a cat who has a toy in my office here, spinning. The ball spins around, so she can just go for hours spinning that thing. So I
need one of those for my cats. They love that.
Oh, both. I have 2 cats, and they go wild. They'll spend hours with this stupid thing. Anyways, so it's a much, the goal is for it to be shorter, not too short, but about 90,000 words is my aim. But the book itself follows this younger character in not quite an alternate reality. So it is a spin-off from the series. And but a much lighter tone, very comedic, very again from the perspective of a child. And I do have 2 or 3 child characters in the Fall of Selvandrea, and I get a lot of feedback saying the chapters from those perspectives are people's favorites. Which to me is, I love writing from a kid's perspective. You have so much freedom to step back from more eloquent prose and have a little more fun with the language, have a little more fun with the tone, and you kind of just let the inner kid in you come out too, which is its whole other element of fun.
Nice. So yeah, I think that's the first, probably in many then, in that case, that you're going to spread out with those characters.
Exactly.
So fantastic. Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on to the third part. I've not played any of the videos in this, which is always a good sign of a good conversation. So the part 3, which is community questions. So I'm going to ask you some random questions. And if you're watching this live, please send some questions in for Tim. And what I'd like to ask you is, if you could take any character from the world of fiction, whether that be a TV show, a book, or a movie, and put that character into one of your stories, what character would you choose?
I feel like my answer to that is probably a cheat. I'm laughing about this. I'm thinking because the one, if I had to pick a story that had more influence than almost any other on mine, it would be The Count of Monte Cristo. So I feel like to a point, I've already maybe kind of put The Count of Monte Cristo in my book. But if I could do it more directly, I think that would be a very fun fit. I love that motif of someone naive, being just caught up in some of the darker elements of the world, forced to kind of claw their way out of it, learn along the way. And then I do love a good revenge story to a point, I really do. So
revenge stories are fantastic. Okay. If you could change the ending to anything, again, opening up to TV, film, and book, what ending would you change and why?
Okay. This is a tougher one.
Yes,
always.
It is.
There's some cases where either the story, some endings I don't like because they're incomplete, and then there are others where I would absolutely change. So, slight nerd moment, and I'll keep it minimal. One story that. Okay, so the movie came out in 2 parts, and after the first part, a whole bunch of people had a theory, and then the second movie came out, and it was nothing like that theory. And I remember being so disappointed. I was so excited. So Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. I actually like Endgame. I thought was overall pretty good. There were some parts of the ending that I would even with that story as it was, were just like throwing out to the fans some really crap scenes that were just not well done. Oh, anyways, but I won't get into that. But one fan theory that came out after Avengers Infinity War was that maybe the real villain wasn't Thanos. Maybe the villain was the Mind Stone, and it had been warping everyone's mind that it came in touch with. And that I loved that. I loved the idea of the real source of evil in that story being essentially an artificial, intelligent, inanimate object.
Yes.
It had such potential, and there were so many things in all the movies leading up to that sort of hinted at that as a possibility, and it just never happened. And there were suggestions that had been the intention, but then they decided on a more palatable route. Anyways, that would have been fun.
That would have been such a better ending. Absolutely. Oh wow. Yeah, you're probably thinking on that one.
That's one of the big ones. Yeah. Anyway, that to me is, I think, the biggest time where I was disappointed. A milder example, Game of Thrones. I'm not the biggest fan of the show, but everyone complains about that ending. The one thing I'll say, if I could just say this quickly, is authors don't make a storyteller the hero. Like, that's just so spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it. I apologize. But
there's plenty of time passed since then.
I think it's safe, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But making Bran become the king because he's the storyteller, the historian, that to me is like just very self-congratulatory for an author to do, and I hated that. I don't know if that was the intended ending or just the showrunners doing it. I don't know. Don't care. I hated
it. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Have you seen the news about the James Bond franchise?
Yeah, that it got purchased by Amazon.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
It's tough. I mean, I'll be flat out honest. I think Rings of Power is garbage. So if we're going to talk about shows they've done so far, it's very hit or miss. Rings of Power, terrible. Terminal List, amazing. Reacher, first season good. Past that, not so much. Wheel of Time, mixed feelings. A lot of really good episodes, one or two really bad ones, and then overall I was actually more content than a lot of people with the second season, except for funny enough, the music. I thought the music went to hell in that series. In the second, it's like they forgot when to put epic music into a fantasy. Anyways, don't get me started. But
that's
I think they could do, like, I'm not going to throw James Bond out of. I think there's hope. It's just I'm going to go in very tentative to whatever comes next.
I agree. I'm very much on that page with you. I think they've got Reacher, and they cannot try and get it close to that. It needs to be they need to keep it kind of down its traditional roots, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be not James Bond. But we'll see. Time will tell. Oh my goodness. There you go. That's a big shoes to fill in that one, I think.
Big time. And I mean, we're still waiting to find out who the next one even is. So.
Yeah. Well, I think, if the producers or the writers and everything of James Bond up to this point, they retired and that's why they're moving on, just wrap it up. Leave it. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have new stories, We don't need to keep having these regurgitations or expansions of existing empires. It's okay to try and start new ones.
It is.
I think Hollywood has kind of forgotten that at this point.
I know. I think that's one of the saddest things that we're facing at the moment. If you actually look at all the good shows that are kicking around on all the platforms and most of the good films at the moment, you will notice at the start of every one of those are based on the book by. And that is a genuine thing.
Yeah.
And if you look outside of that are not based on books, what you're finding is regurgitated movies or TV shows that are being rebooted. So I think authors,
reboots, expansions, it's just
authors have a lot to say in the new cinematic world and the TV world, which is bigger than ever. Disney and Amazon and Apple, everything is streaming a lot. And it's mainly based on books, which is very good for us, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it'd be fun to get more self-published, authors into that world. I get how tough it is, but
it could happen. It could happen.
Absolutely.
Speaking of movies, then I got some random other questions we can check out. What 3 movies could you watch? Let's say 3 movies. That's too many. What movie could you watch over and over again?
Oh, I mean, there are a lot. So if anything, I could probably answer that with too many. You know, like some of the classics, like Gladiator, Count of Monte Cristo. I really love the I love the book, but I also love the movie.
Yeah.
You know, Lord of the Rings, obviously. I mean, it's too long. Yeah.
Have you partaked in Gladiator 2?
I have.
Mixed
feelings. There were some parts that were really good. Overall, I'd give it a B, though.
B. That's a great result. The fighting with the baboons really threw me off.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Werewolf baboons? Are you nuts? Like, it was terrible.
The CGI as well, bizarre. Okay. A book that you would recommend to other people that may not be that well known, perhaps?
I think the top one for me for that, I always have it. Yes, I do. There it is. Yeah. My number one for that would be Taliesin by Stephen R. Lawhead. So I don't know I don't know enough about him as an author to know religiously where he stands. What I can tell you is it has some definite, I would almost call them evangelical, but they might be charismatic Catholic. It has some Christian elements later in the book that do come out without being too overbearing. So it is a book I can recommend. Like, I love it and I read it, you know, from a secular perspective now. I mean, that's my point. I've reread it multiple times. It is essentially a combination of historical fiction and fantasy. So it's a retelling of the birth of Merlin and King Arthur, but tying in Celtic lore. So a lot of Druidic lore, a lot of real myths thrown in. Not so much the telling of the myths as just their influence on the culture. Some of the stories are even retold by characters sitting around the fire. He ties some things I won't spoil, but yeah, a lot of. Like, I think he spent something like 15 years studying the history that ended up being incorporated into it before he wrote these. The writing is rich, very rich, but very palatable. Like, I can't gush about it enough. It's very, very good. You know, it's set in the era where the Roman Empire was just leaving Britain. So you have the clash between the old Celtic and Britannic tribes with Roman Empire, with you know, the different Druidic clan systems. Anyways, it's so rich in fun storytelling and detail and just highly recommend.
Definitely a fan of that book.
Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Okay, Anya says, question, what is one historical era you would never weave into a story?
I would never. I mean, I don't see myself writing from more modern ones. So if I went back, you know, to like I would say my cutoff is definitely, you know, roughly early 1900s and on. I'm always going to probably write in an era before that. I probably wouldn't want to go too far back either. Like, Paleolithic periods really don't interest me, to be honest. When I see those overdone in movies, it just bores me. I can't explain why, but you know, some of those I need, you know, I like some good Iron Age, some medieval, and then some early modern. I mean, my home is early modern. I love early modern history. I think there's a lot of potential there, you know, with different technologies that were dawning and getting to see their influence. You know, even something as simple as the printing press and just how much that revolutionized society. I love that. I love toying with those subtle but revolutionary shifts that society faces.
Pivotal moments in history, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
Frank Lloyd Wright also built a place called Taliesin. Was that in reference to that book?
It's probably not because the character itself is from old Celtic lore. So you'll see in a lot of fantasy, the name Taliesin will come up kind of just either as a slight reference. Usually tied to Merlin and Arthur, but sometimes not. Sometimes he was his own, his own character, essentially a bard or a druid in Celtic lore, a very prominent one, usually respected as the best and the most revered. Yeah. So that's why it gets incorporated into more of that Arthurian legend, either as the father of Merlin or his different. There are different versions, obviously, of all these different legends, but yeah.
Amazing. Okay, I'll check one more in there based on the eras of history then. Yeah. If there was a time that you could go to and maybe spend a week, what era would you go to?
Oh, that's tough. See, I'm not as pessimistic as a lot of people who love history. I love where we are. There are so many good things we have going for us. And
it's quite comfortable. I think.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in like news cycles and become super negative, and you just take a step back and realize how good we have it. You know, so funny enough, probably none. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, maybe, but not.
Well, I was going to say that if someone said then you have an opportunity to go 100 years in the future for a day, would you do that?
Oh, in a heartbeat, absolutely. I think that'd be I again, same thing, a little more optimistic than a lot of people. I don't see that's why dystopian trends drive me. There's been so much dystopian fiction, and I'm so tired. I'm bored, if anything. Give me some of the more optimistic, but give me gritty but optimistic. Give me there's going to be dark times, there's going to be good times. Give me that blend, but give me some I think we're still headed in a good direction. So I think 100 years from now, things are going to look pretty darn cool. I want to see that.
It could also look like a mix between the Matrix and the Terminator, but we never know.
That's the point. So that's a good point. Like, there are dystopian exceptions. I love the Matrix and I love Terminator. So
brilliant. Okay. Last thing before we find out a little bit more at the end, and then wrap the show up because we're over our time. Okay. If you are looking back on your life on your deathbed, this is a Chris Hooley question all day long, the morbid one, and you're looking back at your career, what would success look like to you?
From my deathbed, that's a tough one. I mean, I really love where I'm at and where things are going. I think life has a way of, you don't know what you don't know. So I'm sure my ideal is going to change with time. I want to keep publishing. I want to do well. I do want to succeed. Some people say I'm in it for the craft alone. I'm in it for the craft, but I want, one of my metrics of how well I've learned the craft is whether I do well. So I want my books to do well. I want to take off more than I already am, which it's been great. But I know I have a long way to go. So I want to keep succeeding there. I love editing for other authors. To me, I would want my main income to come from books. My editing, I like doing it the way I'm doing it now, where it's a service to others and I can keep my rates low, to charge less for newer authors to give them the push they need. Because the thing is, some like editing, I think you talked, it's so expensive. It really is. And it's a very prohibitive, I think, barrier for a lot of new authors. So if I can take that away, great. So I'd love to keep doing that. I'd love to expand that. But then again, I don't think, no matter how good I get, there are always going to be limitations on how much I can do. So that's part of why I don't see that as becoming my main source of income, nor would I want it to. But we'll see, I'd love to keep expanding. A friend and I are probably going to be starting a YouTube channel soon. So that's my point. There's always new avenues you can take to keep branching out from where you are now.
Absolutely.
So I can't fully say. I just know I want to keep kicking butt and taking names.
You will. Okay. So finally, where can people find out more about you? I know your website's down at the moment, but can they find you elsewhere? And if they were interested in your editing services, could they contact you somewhere?
Yeah. So, I mean, the easiest way to reach me is probably on X or on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Twix, I was calling it for a while, which I like. Yeah. So, to find my books and stuff, I just Tim McKay on Amazon. And then to find me, easiest place, I mean, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Blue Sky. Those are my main platforms. Twitter most prominently, but I'm on those other two ones as well. I'm trying to build on Instagram now that I have some, a nice book cover and some more visuals I can take advantage of. Yeah. To reach me for editing services, I mean, the best way is just my DMs are open. Reach out on one of those social media services, and I'll give you my email, and we can go from there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tim, for me, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me, sharing your story. We didn't follow the normal format as I normally do and tap into certain things, but that's a sign of a great conversation with a lot of content that you provided. So thank you so much. It's been great to chat to you. I hope you've enjoyed the show.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, brilliant. People, please do go and pick up the Fall of Selvandrea. The Fall of Selvandrea. It shouldn't be that hard to say. It's not. It's just my mouth. Yeah. I'll leave a link in the description to Tim's Amazon page. So if you do want to go pick that up, please do so. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. Leave some comments if you like. If you're listening back or watching it back, get in touch with us on X or Twix, as you just said, which is a fantastic name for it.
Right. I love it.
And send us some questions. If you want to know something, let us know, and I'm sure we'll get back to you. So from me, it's thank you and have a great weekend. Tim, thank you so much, buddy. Good luck with your future series that is going to be many books longer than 3, I'm sure.
Fingers crossed. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute blast, and happy to stay in touch, chat again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. See you very soon. Bye.
Cheers all.